Hello, welcome. Welcome to everybody in the room. Welcome to everybody who's joining us on the recording. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Frankie. I'm Communications Director at All the Elements. And I'm excited to welcome you to the last in the series of the Resilient Community Series 2026. The Resilient Community Series is run in partnership between All the Elements and YHA Outdoor Citizens with support from Sport England. It is entirely based on the things that you tell us you need support with. This year, we've been focusing all about funding and very excited to be through to the last session. Today, we're looking at how to thrive long term and some key skills and tips you might need when you're thinking about building a sustainable funding model. Tonight, oh, let me just add somebody in. There we go. Tonight, we're really excited to be joined by Sam Davis again. Sam is a funding expert with first-hand experience from all corners of the sector as a fundraiser, funder, and a charity leader. And she's joining us through Get Grants, who are a UK-wide fundraising consultancy. And with that, Sam, I'm going to stop sharing, let you bring up your slides and hand over to you.
Great.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Frankie. And thank you ever so much for everyone for hopping on this super hot evening. Thank you for joining us today. And this hour's going to go super quick. And hopefully I'll give you lots of great information to take points that you can sit and think about and apply to your organisation. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okie dokie. Hopefully everyone can see those. So as Frankie said, so this is all around kind of how to thrive long term. So we're going to take a bit of a closer look into what we need to have prepared to really look into the future. We're going to have a look at some strategies, some different approaches, and some framing of what you offer and how that can really support you. Okay, so our course overview today. So we're going to look at some financial foundations first and just cover a couple of the bits that we covered in the first session, but we're really just going to kind of do a bit of an overview there. We're going to look at a multi-layered ecosystem. Okay, so we're going to look at sort of those different elements that are going to make up our ecosystem of how we're funded and how we are going to thrive moving forward. We're then going to look at that sustainability strategy. So really putting that into an actionable kind of plan of how we're going to achieve that, where it's not really overwhelming for us, not really it's ambitious, but it's not too much for our organisations and really finding that sweet spot. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the language of success. So this is to really kind of highlight, the profound impact of connecting people with nature. But that passion shouldn't mean exhaustion, okay? It's working smarter and it's going more from the organisational thinking, more to organisational thinking rather than that project thinking, okay? So looking briefly at the foundations here. So those of us that joined us on the first call, this probably is a little bit of a recap. So we're not going to spend ages on this section, but just touching on kind of calculating the true cost of thriving and full cost recovery. Okay, so when you're writing a funding bid or you're looking at kind of those tenders or talking to any organisations about funding you, it should never just cover direct delivery costs. Okay, your core costs and your overheads are also essential for your infrastructure. So when we think of kind of other costs, and you might be able to think of a few now if you want to pop something in the chat box about kind of other costs that you maybe don't account for now, but maybe you think I should be looking at that really in my next funding bid, or maybe looking at kind of building that into that model. Other costs might be things like kit storage, it might be kit maintenance, it might be drying space, it might be travel, first aid equipment, supervision, that kind of thing. So when we're talking about that full cost recovery, they're all the things that we need to be taking into consideration, as well as our actual project delivery, our staffing, specific equipment you might need for that session. We're also looking at our core costs and our overheads. So moving on to those kind of invisible costs, okay, this is going to help us move from that thriving budget, not a surviving budget. Okay, so in survival mode, you probably are only calculating your delivery. Okay, maybe a little bit of overhead. You might have put, a certain percentage in for core costings or things like that, but that isn't the true cost of what you offer. Okay. The true cost is all those things that we were just talking about, but it's also things like prep work, it's things like risk assessments, it's things like any community engagement that you're doing. If you pay salaries, it might be your pension contributions. Okay. It's also looking at things like reserves, and contributions towards your reserves to really build up that core stability and have that safety net there. Okay. Some of you might have a reserve policy, depending on what kind of structure you are, and whether that's something that you discussed as an organisation. So it might be that you need, as part of your reserve policy, it might be that you need 3 to 6 months operating costs as part of that reserves policy. Now, that sort of income generation doesn't come from nowhere. Okay, we need to be building that in. So when we're looking at that kind of model of that real sort of thriving model, we're looking at the cost of delivery, absolutely. We're looking at our overheads, so any kind of overheads that we have, if we have a building or if we operate from anywhere, do they have any running costs? We've then got that support, so we've then got that prep work that goes into it, those risk assessments, those sort of things are all support. And then we're looking at those reserve contributions as well. And that's going to make a really resilient model that's going to help you thrive moving forward. Okay, you'll find that a lot of organisations that kind of, our delivery costs £10,000. Okay, well, that's brilliant. Well, you've got that, but then what have you got at the end of that? Okay, and it's looking at kind of the realistic cost of and the true cost of what it is that you offer. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a little bit of almost a reminder perhaps, or a little bit of a sense check of like, oh yeah, I really do need to be applying for those and including those in your budgets. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a little bit of inspiration there to go and look at that. Great. Okay, so looking at kind of creating that ecosystem then. So just a little activity in the chat box, and I'd be really interested to know if anyone currently has any kind of trading activity income. Does anyone operate a membership structure, or does anyone have any strategic partnerships? Obviously, not every approach works for every group and every style. However, we're going to run through some different models of how we can look at some different options, and that is going to help you feel a bit more like there's an approach, like there's a bit more of a kind of robust strategy towards it. So does anyone have anything that they want to share, or that they want to pop in the chat box to say, oh yeah, we do this and it works really well for us? I'd be really interested to know. Great. So we've got some trading income from paid clients. Joss, does that work well for you? Is that something that's been quite successful for you?
Yeah, it has. And we have some like regular clients now who kind of come back to us. It's quite seasonal, but they kind of come back to us every year because it's sort of a proven kind of way of working now. So yeah, it works pretty well.
Great. Lovely. Thank you, Joss. Someone else with their hands up there. Do you want to, what is it that you're doing at the minute that's working well for you?
I think it's me. It's Grace here. So I think trying to kind of find these sustainable funding models is something that we're just kind of getting in, or we started probably a couple of years ago, but we're not quite there. So we've introduced things like partnership schemes with event organizers, because we're primarily a run community, a trail running community. So we've introduced event partnerships with event organizers where we have gold, silver, and bronze membership So we introduced it just over a year ago, I want to say. So, depending on the level of that kind of partnership, versus how much they kind of pay into the scheme, but also we benefit from, they help us kind of achieve our mission to increase participation and inclusion in trail running. And then, there's other things that we're looking at the moment, because we don't charge membership or anything, but we possibly looking at making something more on a voluntary basis, because the whole idea is not to disadvantage people, right? But to encourage people to contribute as opposed to charging them for a service. So there's a nuance.
Absolutely.
There's a nuance there. We have got strategic partnership. Our main funder is Adidas Terex, but we're conscious that that's one stream of funding. If they pulled, then we're pulled down with them, basically. So.
And that's a really good point, Grace. Thank you for that. It's a really good point in terms of having that varied and not relying too much, and too heavily. So, yeah, thank you so much. That's a really great insight. And Pips, I've just noticed in the chat as well, they have traded income from having a site for camping and residential stays. So again, really great ideas in terms of using what you've already got, and kind of looking at different options so you're not too heavily reliant. So that's brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing, everybody. We're going to run through a couple of different models, and some of you might already employ these sort of things. Some of you might already be thinking about it. But equally, if you've not been thinking about it, or you feel like there might be an opportunity, then absolutely explore these options. So in terms of from sort of like a corporate wellness side of things, team building retreats for local businesses are really, really popular. They have quite high margin for bookings that directly fund the local community programs. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example later from a group that does exactly this, and all of their profits go straight back into their community programs. So it can have that real direct benefit, from that corporate side of things. And obviously, they have CSR goals and as well as their kind of staff mental health and well-being. So the benefits of businesses are also great, and the benefits for you are also great. Okay, so in terms of looking at whether that's an option for you, it normally starts with knowing someone that knows someone. Do you know someone that can make an introduction? Okay, that might be your trustees. That might be family members or family members from people who are part of your group. That might be other community members. Okay, they might have relatives themselves, live next door to, have a connection where they're in that corporate world, they're in that corporate setting, and they're happy to make that introduction for you. An invitation down, look at what we do, look at the impact that we're making, look at what benefits you can have as an organisation, and get them to see for themselves really what the benefits are. So that can be one avenue into that sort of corporate wellness model. Another kind of idea around trading models, and some of you have mentioned that you're doing this already, is kind of that like public paid workshops. So looking at kind of specific nature expertise, so things like foraging walks, things that are really popular, especially around, I live in the Midlands, and something that's really popular around me are things like sound baths and that kind of sauna and dip. Everyone loves a sauna and dip. There's a few local lakes, and they've now got, the sauna element where they've actually invested in a lakeside sauna, and they've really seen it take off. A couple of them have got little cafe sites, things like that. That sort of trading income can be absolutely massive in terms of the growth that you can have with that. Better than anyone, your community, what's popular in your area, perhaps, research kind of locally, nationally, what is going to kind of be popular with kind of outdoor enthusiasts that have the capacity to pay full price, and translate some of those like really core capabilities into that reliable stream of cash flow. It might be that you have, 2 sessions a week that are done like this, a foraging walk and bushcraft basics for an example, you know, and it's not something that you're going to have to go out and learn. It's your core capability. It's what you offer as a group now that you can just turn into that traded income, and that can then be kind of plunged back into the community projects that you run for those that maybe can't afford to pay full price. So that is kind of our trading models. We then look at our membership models, and I think a couple of people mentioned, I think Rose, you might have mentioned something similar to this. So there's like a friends of scheme, okay? Converting your kind of regular supporters into patrons, essentially. They have an understanding more than most the impact that you have. And it can be a really kind of low commitment subscription kind of model where you've got regular attendees or community supporters who really care about your long-term success. And I think, having run a charity myself, I think it's really sometimes difficult to ask those that are really close to you to say, you know, how much would you be willing to pay to come and attend a session? Or, you know, that kind of conversation can be quite difficult for us as group leaders, charity leaders. And you will find that they are your biggest supporters and they are more than willing to give what they can. It can be really small donations, £5 to £10 a month, maybe £0 to £5 a month. You know, it doesn't have to be huge amounts, but again, it's that regular income that if you've got a few people doing that and that builds up some momentum, it's unrestricted reserves that go straight into. You don't have to, you know, portion them off to project spend. You don't have to do a specific type of delivery for them. You can just have that. It goes into that unrestricted pot and it can build up wherever you see fit, okay, wherever the need is. So that's a kind of friend of scheme. The tiered tickets, again, the impact you could make with this could be a really, really good option to look to introduce. It's members supporting members, essentially, and it's a kind of pay it forward concept. Now, what this gives is a really strong evidence of need. So if you are writing a funding bid and you are saying we work with deprived areas, you know, low-income families, whatever it might mean, this is an amazing evidence of need to put into your funding bid to say, well, we do a tiered ticketed approach where we do a pay it forward concept, and this is how many people are using that. It then gives that real genuine, real kind of value added need that doesn't strain your bank balance. It's not something that's going to be super intensive for you to look after or for you to you know, be really kind of admin heavy with or anything like that. But it's so inclusive for people, and it's kind of ticketing dynamics. It's something that could be a really, really quick win, and support, you know, it's that peer support, and sometimes that's, you know, the most valuable thing. So that's our kind of membership models, or a couple of examples of our membership models. We're then going to move on to partnership models. Okay, so these are more kind of contract-based, perhaps, or commissioned services. Okay, so this is where we're moving to system integration by aligning your outdoor work with those larger healthcare outcomes. Okay, it will require a bit more work in terms of getting in to see the right person, making those right connections, having those conversations are a little bit more intensive. However, the outcomes of those, the return on investment in terms of your time invested versus the outcomes of the money that you know, may well receive from it are massive, okay? Social prescribing is a really good example of that. And I'm going to talk through a little bit about how you could sort of start that off to become like a monetized kind of offer for you. There's then that contracted delivery as well, okay, which is kind of those nature connection interventions that are really great for mental health, as we all know, and really kind of speak to that, like I say, those more kind of wider healthcare outcomes. So talking about the social prescribing, it's really important to connect with your primary care network if you've not already done that or not already kind of sought out those connections. So you'll be wanting to look at kind of your clinical directors or a social prescribing manager within those PCNs, those primary care networks. Okay, so you want to find the person that is responsible for social prescribing within that primary care network, okay, through GPs or healthcare settings, okay. What you'll then need is to kind of present your offer as that clinical prevention service, okay? And those of you that are already familiar with social prescribing, it's very much aimed at that kind of mild to moderate mental health issues or kind of that isolation. That's where their kind of clinical focus is for social prescribing, okay? What you can then talk about is potentially a contract where the primary care network block books a 6 or a 12-week nature connection programme, and the link workers, so your social prescribing link workers, refer patients in directly. Okay, so the primary care network would be where the money comes from essentially, but then you've got that direct referral link from your social prescribing link worker with the people that need that support the most, and they are directly referred into your service and you are being paid to deliver that service, okay? And you might need to talk about things like your health outcomes, you know, you might need to link it to kind of what that primary care network is looking to achieve. As I say, it's a little bit more intensive perhaps than, you know, even writing a funding bid. Sometimes it can just require a little bit of relationship building, and just, you know, go into those meetings, making sure you've got all your ducks in a row, making sure that everything's kind of set out clearly, and you know what you're going to deliver as part of that block booking, that nature connection program. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a little bit of some actionable points to look at with social prescribing. With our contracted delivery, okay, so this could be like personal health budgets. So the first step would be to kind of register your group as an approved local provider, and that can be done with your integrated care board or your local authority, depending on what area you're all in. It will depend on how it's structured, okay? So register your group, that's obviously free. You're then on there as a kind of approved local provider. When a patient then receives a personal health budget, they can choose to spend a portion of it directly with you, okay? So what you need then is kind of that offer where it's like, yeah, we're doing a weekly woodland gathering, so their personal health budget would be spent on that gathering, okay? You invoice the patient's budget holder, so that might be the NHS directly or a third-party broker, just like a private service provider, okay? So, as I say, this might work differently, but that's a really kind of rough and ready sort of overview of how you might then connect in with direct referral, because people will be picking you to spend their budget with, okay? So you need to think about perhaps how you know, what your social media looks like, perhaps in terms of, is it warm, is it welcoming, is it someone that, you know, if I'm a person looking at your social media for the first time, I know nothing about your group. Is it inclusive? You know, is the language inclusive? Does it speak to someone that might not know anything or feel a little bit nervous or apprehensive about attending your group? Just a little sense check about how that's coming across can be really, really valuable for someone that's never accessed your session before. So that might be something, as again, a bit of an actionable point to kind of go and look, just do that little bit of a sense check there. Okay. The last thing on partnership models that I'm going to touch on is kind of subcontracting. So this is all around kind of the voluntary and community sector. So normally bigger kind of NHS bodies normally give big contracts to social prescribing contracts to local anchor charities, okay? So finding those kind of local anchor charities, so it might be an alliance, or it might be a voluntary service that holds your area's central NHS social prescribing contract. Okay, so finding that group that holds those purse strings and hold that budget is going to be really, really important. Okay, so you might need to do a little bit of research, ask a few questions, see who's really kind of, you know, holding that that central NHS contract. Okay, position your group as a specialist green delivery partner. Okay, so you will find that they can kind of flow down a portion of their core grant funding to your organisation to expand their kind of green prescribing portfolio. Okay, so again, it's a direct referral channel, and just by positioning yourself in a way that places you as the expert at the forefront of that, you know, we are the preferred green delivery partner for this pot of money. You've got that direct flow down of funding that then, you know, they're taking care of a lot of like administrative overheads for you, and you are getting the people attending, you're getting that funding to be able to do so. And as I say, they're quite they can be quite sort of difficult partnerships to get up and running, and sort of you know, take that time, and you have to invest a little bit more yeah, a bit more time, a bit more, right, I need to go to this meeting, I need to, you know, be in front of this people, because it's really, you know, it's going to be really beneficial for the group. But hopefully you can see how by positioning yourself in that way, it's going to open potentially so many doors in terms of getting that flow down funding for you. Okay, so hopefully that has given you a couple of really kind of practical tools and like a how-to of how we can, you know, come away from this session today and go, right, the first place I'm going to check is my neighbour, because I know her husband works in a corporate, or actually I'm going to go and find out who my integrated care board is, and I'm going to position myself in that room. Okay, as a kind of actionable thing now, what I want you to do is just write down one local asset, business, healthcare service in your area that could benefit from your offer. So I want you to get a piece of paper, write it on your phone, write something down where you can go and explore that tomorrow or the next day or next week. One local asset in your area that you could really explore. Perfect. Hope everyone's written something down there as an area to get thinking about next week. Brilliant. Okay, so now we've considered some options that will help us to sort of diversify our income. We want to put that into a strategy, okay? And if anyone's ever done a strategy or worked up a strategy before, we want to make sure that we can follow it, and we want to make sure we can keep up with it, okay? It needs to be ambitious, and it needs to sort of stretch us, and we, you know, our goals need to be challenging. But what we don't want to do is really overpromise and say, yeah, I'm going to do all these things in the next 12 months. And then you're reviewing it after 6 months and thinking, oh my goodness, I'm so behind. I'm really panicking about under-delivering here, okay? It doesn't make us feel good about our abilities. It really can throw us off track. And as I say, you know, having led a charity before, I've fallen into that sort of trap before, where I've gone, yeah, I can do all these amazing things. Give me a year and I can do all of this. And sometimes it's just not doable for whatever reason. So we want to make sure that it's totally within our capacity to deliver, whilst being ambitious enough to really stretch us. Okay, so what we're going to do is try and find that balance. Okay, and finding that balance sometimes takes a little bit of time, just to see what the mix looks like of your income. Okay, and it sounds like a couple of people on the call have got a bit of a mix of income, which is amazing. It's a really good practice to kind of look at what your current mix is, and is that working for you? Okay, it might be working amazingly for you, which is great. It's just that we want a bit more of it, perhaps, or we want that to work a bit smarter for us. Okay, it might be 60% grants, 30% trading income, you know, 10% community donations, and that might work for you. Our aspirations might be that we want to, you know, bring our grant income down. We want to bring it down to 50% or 40%, because we don't want to become too reliant, because grants are, you know, more competitive, you know, they're really difficult to get. You know, maybe we don't want to rely on that. Maybe we want to get our trading income up to 50%, okay, because maybe that's a little bit more reliable for us. So we want to look at what it currently is, and we want to look at what the aspirations are to change it, and what we want to change it to, okay? Sometimes that requires a bit of thinking, a bit of consultation with our staff team, our trustees, our management committee, whoever it might be that's, you know, in those conversations. And I find that, especially when we're looking to change something, we need everybody on board with that, okay? We need people to really be bought in to kind of go, look, we're going to try doing a partnership model. We're going to try social prescribing and try and monetize the social prescribing offer. If half of you are on the fence and half of you are a yes, there could be a good chance of success, okay? You all need to be firmly in the yes in order for it to succeed, okay? For you all to be behind it, for you all to make a big success of it, okay? When we're looking at, you know, other opportunities perhaps to get some funding in, we can fall a little bit to mission drift, okay? Sometimes we might have to say no to money, and that feels really uncomfortable, okay? However, to thrive long term, and obviously, you know, looking ahead to the future, and to really have the sustainable income that we're really comfortable with and that feels really true to our core of our offer, it in reality might be difficult to turn down pots of funding, but do they really align with your core values? If they do not align with your core values, you've got this mission drift that could be happening. You've got that risk of not delivering. It might not be to the funder's liking. There might be some forced elements that you or the funder don't feel comfortable with. It becomes unable to measure, unable to report, or really, really difficult to do those things. And what that does is just create sort of a bad reputation. Either side, you know, it could be that you've said yes to a pot of money, or you've agreed to a partnership and you think, oh, it's really far from our core values. And what that does is just put your organisation under kind of unnecessary stress, really, unnecessary pressure to deliver that, okay? And if we're thinking about that longer term mission, when you think of, you know, big organisations that are really kind of stuck true to themselves, you won't generally find that they accept bits here and bits there on the peripheries. They really stick within their boundaries, okay? And they really stick true to kind of what they believe, their core values, their core offering. That is what they stick to, and that's how they make a success longer term. So just be aware of that mission drift, okay? We then want to look at kind of capacity mapping. Now, this is about being realistic about your team's energy and your team's capacity, okay? All of these models that we've just looked at in the previous section all require effort, okay? At least some to get them off the ground initially. So choose a mix that matches your team's skills, okay? If it feels like too much of a stretch, it's probably too much of a stretch. If it feels like, you know, this person's got a bit of an interest or a bit of an acumen for looking in this direction, explore that, absolutely, okay? But it needs to be within the capacity, the skill set, they need the support. All of those things need to be taken into consideration when you're finding that kind of balance of income, okay? And then when we're considering a growth pipeline, so you might want to consider reinvesting profits from your trading income directly into hiring your next staff member, okay, to create that operational breathing room. It could be that you're looking at another use for that growth. It could be that you're looking at premises or something more fixed, or, you know, an asset, fixed asset, a minibus, something like that. Okay, so what does that growth look like for you, and how are you going to achieve that? Because I think strategy wise, a lot of the time, it's great to say we're going to do this and we're going to get there, and that's our goal, that's our ambition. The how is obviously the really, really tough bit. And sometimes that's where we can get really carried away with ourselves, but really considering that kind of growth pipeline and, you know, once we've achieved this, that growth is going to go back into this. It just helps paint that circle. It helps keep you on track, and it really makes that strategy deliverable. We're not going to get to the end of our 12 months and think, oh my goodness, I've not achieved this. And where have I gone wrong? And, you know, where have we drifted here? Okay. So your strategy needs to definitely be achievable but ambitious. Okay. As I said earlier, just to give you a bit of an example here, and some of you might have heard of Wildwood Days. So they are a small nature-based social enterprise and forest school provider. Okay. They provide lots of really cool kind of outdoor activities, adult workshops, parties, team building activities for corporates, okay? So what they did was kind of introduce specific high margin earned income streams, and they invested that profit directly into their grassroots community offer, okay? So they got that mix spot on, okay, and I'm sure it wasn't without its, its changes here and there. But what they did is, instead of relying solely on that kind of grant income to survive, they diversified, okay, and they designed specific paid services aimed at audience with higher budgets, essentially. So they do corporate team building and wellness days. So they do outdoor expertise, team away days for local businesses, looking at mindfulness, looking at campfire cooking, things like that, for sort of that corporate well-being. They do adult paid for workshops, which is kind of curated weekend workshops for the general public, but they look at sort of teaching premium skills. So that can be things like green woodworking, leather craft, foraging, things like that, that are that kind of, I had a friend that went on one that was all woodworking. So he made, things for ornaments for his house through the wood that he'd foraged in the, the wild woodland. Next to where they did it, and he went away for the weekend and had a really great time. But that can be something that you can absolutely look at kind of curating and designing around what you can already offer. So Wildwood Days, because they structured to prioritise their mission over the private profit, they took the clear surpluses from those corporates and public workshops and just funneled them back into the organisation, okay? And what that helped them to do was subsidise those free community spaces, okay? So one corporate day directly funded free or heavily subsidised nature sessions for low-income local families, vulnerable adults, home-educated children who couldn't afford to attend, okay? So that's a really sort of direct way that we get the profit from this, and that's what we're using it for, okay? It links directly from here, and we're funding it into that, okay, which might be your original target audience who you want to help directly, okay? What it's also done is help them expand their core team. So rather than kind of doing delivery by delivery basis, it's predictable trading profit, and it's helped them to securely contract and pay fair, reliable wages, rather than that kind of as and when freelance outdoor leader sort of style. It's helped them to actually employ people, and it's increased their team capacity, and that's helped them improve their offer and expand their offer, okay? And then it's also helped them invest in low impact infrastructure, okay? So what they do, they work closely with the land. They've used trading surplus to buy shared high quality community kit, so group tarps, specialist tools, accessible outdoor equipment as well. And what that's done is elevate that experience for everyone, okay, including their free community groups. So I've such a great example of some really diverse income streams, just taking bits of what they know and really applying like a more kind of it's a business kind of mindset to it, but really looking at who can pay for what and where can we put that profit into what we want to fund, okay? And by having that that mix of income, they're not too heavily reliant on one more than the other. So hopefully that's given you a bit of inspiration to look at what others are doing and see if you can apply something like that yourselves, okay? I'm aware that some providers on the call work with communities with limited financial means. A lot of charities are born out of that in terms of working with those that are most vulnerable in our communities. But if you are thinking about sourcing income from kind of more that corporate side of things, local wellness, that sort of thing, exploring that side of fundraising, make sure you place appropriate value on what you can offer, okay? Don't be scared to charge that high end to a business that can clearly afford it, okay? Because that profit is just going to go straight back into, the groups that you would like to fund for free or heavily subsidised, okay? So just some key points on that then, really around kind of that strategy side of things. Charging a premium rate doesn't dilute your mission, it actively funds it, okay? Consider that healthier mix of incomes and make sure it suits your team, make sure it's doable, make sure you're not relying on one more than the other, and make sure that everyone's on the, in the same boat, on the same team, singing off the same hymn sheet. Initially, all types of income require more thought and work to get them off the ground, but it does pay off, okay? We've, maybe considered something and gone, oh my goodness, this is a lot, this might seem like quite a hefty challenge. Initially, to get it off the ground, to get those conversations going, to get yourselves in the right rooms, around the right tables, can be the hardest bit, okay? Once you're around those tables, you're known to your local authority or whoever it might be, those conversations become easier and easier, and hopefully you can see some of that in practice, that it can be funneled down and filtered down to you to provide your service and what you are already doing, okay? Lovely stuff. Okay, so we're just going to touch on our last section, which is more around kind of the language of success. So this is really looking at kind of a value-based framing around what you're offering. So funders don't buy what you do, they buy the change you make. Okay, so those two statements there. So we run a 6-week forest school program for 10 youths. That's what you do, that's your what, okay? The impact and the change you make is we reduce social isolation and build emotional resilience in vulnerable young people through sustained nature-based interventions, okay? Think about the amazing impact that you have on your participants, What's different about the way that you deliver your projects compared to maybe someone, cross-county or someone doing something different down the road at a charity? What makes you different? If it helps, write down what your participants feel, what they're saying after they've attended, those anecdotal conversations that you might be having. It can provide such valuable insight that you can include in your terminology, okay? So what we want to do is really kind of frame our language around the value, okay? Rather than the what change are we making, okay? So when we talk about terminology and some key words that can help unlock some kind of long-term multi-year funding, it describes the impact less like a service and more like a kind of stable community-based asset, okay? So rather than saying project, use core program. Rather than saying activities, use interventions. Rather than using beneficiaries, we might want to use community members. And rather than the cost of our project, it's the investment into our people, okay? And framing it this way will help you place that value just by the words that you're using, okay? And that's all we're changing. We're not changing anything that you're doing. We're not changing the approach that you're and how you're doing it. It's the words that we're using can just help that funder kind of go, change from like, this project is going to help X, Y, and Z to this core program supports vulnerable people, etc. Okay, just by using that terminology, it just moves away from that kind of as I say, that service that's kind of, we're here for the community, we serve the community, and it's more like we're a stable community-based asset and our community need us, okay? Hopefully there's some more that you might be able to think of there, that you might be kind of thinking, does this terminology really say that we're this sort of stable asset, or does it make me think, no, we're a service, that we're just here providing service and that's who we are, okay? Try and identify someone you're writing perhaps and just kind of go, can I change this? Can I look at this through a different lens? Okay. So looking at kind of those without premises, because I'm aware obviously it's not going to apply to everyone on the call, but sometimes we might not have those premises. So proving that value sometimes can be a little bit more difficult, okay? But frame that as an asset, okay? It's low overheads, okay? So what that means is it's highly adaptable, you're deeply integrated into the community, and you've got a minimal environmental footprint, okay? That means that every single penny goes directly into community delivery, safety, and the leadership rather than rent, lighting, building, upkeep, okay? So again, it's just framing that language slightly differently to say, we haven't got a premises, that's cool. What that means is that everything goes back into our delivery, making sure that we deliver safe sessions, our staff are you know, fairly paid, well paid, and you know, we value those. Okay. And then it's that minimal footprints that leave no trace, you know. It means that there's kind of zero carbon intensive structures. So again, that minimal footprint can be a really kind of important one to mention as well. Okay. Focus on that trust building as part of this. So when you're using that terminology, it's all about building trust with, you know, that might be a corporate, it might be your funders. It's all about trust building. Nature connection and community cohesion, they're not 6-month pilots. We all know that, okay? They're not flash in the pan. They're not, oh, we'll do work for 9 months and we've solved all our problems, you know? It really requires that deep, seasonal, multi-year trust and intervention and investment, okay? It means that we can and need to be highly adaptable, okay? We need to meet communities exactly where they are, and not having premises means that you've got that flexibility around different green spaces, woodlands, you're mobile, okay? So you can meet your community where they are, sorry, okay? It also means that there's that real kind of deep community integration, okay? Leaders can work directly in wild environments, making natural spaces accessible to local residents, and having those kind of, you know, building those deep organic partnerships, okay? It's really, really powerful to invite someone into that space. Okay, you're not in a building, there's no walls, there's no fluorescent lighting, there's no, you know, it's pure, it's organic, it's green, and we're in that space and we're just experiencing that nature. That is so, so powerful, okay? So we need to use that to our advantage and frame our language in a way that goes, this is an asset that we are structured in this way. Okay. Great. So when we're justifying that kind of multi-year ask, and as I say, we're looking at that thriving, we're looking at that real kind of sustainable kind of future-proofing. As I said, it's deep trust building, okay? Especially with the vulnerable groups that probably most of us will be working with. They need that stable, reliable contact with familiar leaders across consecutive seasons to feel truly safe in the outdoors, okay? The cycle of the seasons in terms of, you know, the blistering heat that we're experiencing at the minute down to that kind of winter cold, okay? It's sort of what that requires is that kind of multi-year cycle to integrate fully. We're taking those learnings year on year on year on year, okay? And what that does is it helps us plan long ahead, okay? Further ahead, it helps us plan around weather, school holidays, maybe important kind of faith dates, things like that. It moves us from that reactive learning and that kind of, oh my goodness, we need to react to that thing because it's a school holiday or it's this, it's that, to that proactive, well, we know these things happen and we've got a really good idea about what the cycle is saying and how we're navigating that changing weather, okay? And having that that fallback, okay? In you know, the great outdoors in the UK, okay, we always need a contingency. And what that does is enable you to use your learning to really kind of go, we know what we're talking about. We have done this year on year on year on year. We've built this trust. We've got that contingency. This is how we use our learning. And that justifies that, you know, real kind of multi-year ask. It changes that language from reactive to proactive because you know, you've learned, okay, and you've applied those learnings to your delivery. Okay. So I think we're good on time. So summary, just to recap a couple of points, and I told you it was going to go really quickly, and I feel like it's gone really quickly again this evening. Throwing ourselves right back to nearly an hour ago. So really consider your full cost recovery in the first instance. Really consider what that means for you. What's your reserve saying? What's your overheads? What support costs do you need as well as your delivery? Consider those first, okay? Think about those different models of income, okay, that you could introduce, but think about your team capacity. Make sure it's achievable, but ambitious. And use that language that translates from what you do to the impact you have, okay? Write one thing down if you've not already. write one thing down that you're going to take away in action after this meeting. Circle it, underline it, hold yourself accountable, look at it tomorrow, look at it next week. And hopefully you've all found some really good little nuggets to take away from this session today. I'll hand back to Frankie, but thank you ever so much, and it's open to questions.
Sam, thank you so much. Wow, what a packed session that was. So much to cover, and I'm sure that there's loads and loads of different takeaways that people can pull out of that session. So thank you so much. We do have probably a good 5 minutes of questions. So if anybody has anything to ask, please pop it in the chat. If you want to unmute yourself and ask it, just pop your hand up. Just a reminder that we are recording, so if you don't want to be on the recording, then just pop it in the chat and we can read it out for you. I noticed that there were a couple of questions that went in as we were going through, and the first one is, what's the best way of getting in with local businesses? Someone says they've tried it often but not really got anywhere.
I guess from experience, the best way to do it really is to find the right person. I think a lot of the times we're, maybe approaching that business cold, or not with the right connection that can action something, or that can that has the final say about things that we need to know about. Okay, so finding the right person to speak to is so important, because you'll absolutely hit those blockades. So the ones that I've experienced are through connections that I already have, and that's been through a trustee of a charity that I worked for and led. So it was kind of someone her son worked with had a connection into that, and that was how the introduction was made. And sometimes it's really not the easiest path to get that connection, but I would absolutely try and find a connection that way. So that you're not wasting your time, anyone else's time. You need to be getting in front of the right person, straight off the bat.
There was a question that was more specifically about the Wildwood example. Just wondering if they have other funding as well.
They looked like they had a really kind of diverse income stream model. That if you have a look at their website, it breaks down exactly what they do. So they've got that forest school offer. As I say, they've got kind of those adult paid workshops, and they do that corporate offer as well, but they also support those low income families and things as well. So I imagine they will have kind of, I'm assuming you mean grant funding by that. I assume they will have little pots of grant funding. It's not super explicit on their website from what I can remember, but have a look at their website, because it is brilliant what they do offer. Lots of inspiration there, hopefully.
Thanks so much. That's the questions we've got so far. If anybody's got any others, please do pop in the chat, raise a hand. This is the last session in this series. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. But there are plenty of other ways to get involved with all the elements. We have a range of online socials, a load of different content series that support with resources, and all of our resource pages, as well as much, much more. Particularly related to funding, we have our funding page, which we update with grants that are relevant to the All the Elements community. So if you found this series helpful, please go check those out. And there'll be more information in the follow-up email. I think that's all I've got to say. Just a final thank you, Sam. It's been really amazing to have you with us.
You're welcome. Thank you ever so much for having me.
And I hope everybody has a lovely rest of their evening.
Thanks, everyone.